I call to order the December 2023 meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone. Vice Chair Gully is on her way, and I believe Regent Kenyanya is as well. Thank you to those that are joining us via the live stream video and those attending in our boardroom or via Zoom. Let me welcome our student representatives for today. It's great to have you both in person. We have Leal Cohen from the Rochester campus and Flora Yang from the Twin Cities campus. So welcome. We'll move to our first agenda item, which is to review the university's external audit report and fiscal year 2023 financial statement audit. Here to provide the update, our controller, Molly Viola, from the university's external auditor, Deloitte, Managing Director Judy Dockendorf, and Audit Manager Nicole Hoyam. And whichever one of you would like to start us off, that would be great.
Good morning. I'm Molly Viola, the controller for the University of Minnesota. I'm here with Judy Dockendorf and Nicole Hoyam. I'll turn it over to them so they can walk through their presentation from Deloitte this morning.
Great.
Good morning, Chair Farnsworth and members of the committee. I'm Judy Dockendorf, as Controller Viola just mentioned, and I have Nicole Hoyam with us as well. We're here to present the results of the 2023 annual audit of the university's financial statements and then give a little bit of an update on the other services that we have also been in progress on here for 2023. So from an overview perspective, our responsibility in relation to the financial statements of the university is to ensure that the financial statements are materially correct. In doing that, we perform a number of procedures that Nicole will highlight a few of those for you. But we do issue our opinion under government auditing standards. In that, we do assess and look at internal controls, but we do not opine on internal controls. So we understand certain controls are in place to ensure compliance with laws and regulations. Things are in place such as reviews of journal entries, account reconciliations, the financial statements, but we do not opine on internal controls as that's not required. Nicole will walk through a few of the areas where we spent more significant time during our audit of the financial statements, which was completed in October. That completion of the financial statements included an unmodified or a clean opinion on the financial statements, so the highest level of an opinion that can be provided. So I'll turn it over to Nicole to walk through some of the areas we spent some additional time.
Thank you, Judy. So consistent with our planning communications and past audits across all organizations, there's a presumed fraud risk of management override, that they're in a unique position to manipulate accounting records or financial statements. So this is not unique to the university. This is a required fraud risk as part of our auditing standards. To address this risk, as Judy mentioned, we perform control design and implementation testing over journal entry reviews, account reconciliations, and key controls over the financial close and reporting process. A part of our procedures include analyzing journal entries and selecting journal entries with characteristics of audit interest, obtaining the underlying support to understand the business rationale of the transaction. We hold fraud inquiries with various members of management, members of the board, internal audit, as well as HR, to understand if there's any specific fraud risk factors, allegations of fraud, or known fraud that has occurred. We also evaluate accounting estimates for potential bias. As a result of our procedures, we did not identify any instances of management override. Additionally, we are required to communicate significant accounting policies and practices. So the university's significant accounting policies are outlined in Note 1 of the financial statements. In the current year, the university adopted GASB 96, which is related to software-based IT arrangements, and we'll discuss that a little bit later. Outside of the adoption of the standard, there were no significant changes to the accounting policies. We look at the accounting policies and their application to ensure that they are appropriately applied and disclosed in accordance with the accounting standards. We also consider key accounting estimates. At the university, the biggest accounting estimate we look at is related to the alternative investments portfolio. But our procedures over accounting estimates are to make sure that the valuation of these is not biased and that we're looking at appropriate valuation for the financial statements. So as I mentioned, the biggest accounting standard brought on this year was GASB 96. So really the purpose of this accounting standard is to bring long-term IT contracts that are in place onto the statement of financial position. This required retrospective application, so it restated 2022 amounts as well. Our procedures over this were related to getting an understanding of management's process to inventory contracts that might have CBITAs. We select a number of contracts to evaluate whether, okay, did the university appropriately evaluate whether it was a CBITA or not? And then with what they did record on the statement of net position, we select those and make sure that those were appropriately accounted for as well. This is the primary procedures we performed. We did not identify any material misstatements with the adoption. So as I mentioned, the key accounting estimate that we look at for the university is the alternative investments. So these are investments that aren't, publicly traded on tickers that you can look up the value for. So our procedures to address this include understanding internal controls, key internal controls to address alternative investments. We send confirmations directly to third parties, so the external investment managers, and then perform a number of procedures over purchases and sales, as well as roll forward of information if the investment statements are not as of the June 30th date, to roll forward the valuation of those investments. So with respect to some of the other required communications, just a reminder that audits are designed to obtain reasonable rather than absolute assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement that would impact the users of the financial statements. We did not identify any material uncorrected misstatements or past disclosures. Another thing to highlight is that there is other information within the annual report within management's discussion and analysis. So we read this information and perform tie-outs to make sure that it's consistent with information that's stated in the base financial statements. This is not subject to full audit procedures, but we are evaluating it for consistency and whether there's any indications that information within the base financial statements are materially misstated. With that, I'll hand it back to Judy for some of our other communications.
Thank you, Nicole. Just a few other required communications within Appendix A here related to the audit of the financial statements. Nothing really material that I would call out for you here. We had great cooperation from Controller Viola and her team throughout the process. It actually starts back in the February time period when we present to the committee on what our plan is, and then we really kick off in the April-May time period with planning, moving all the way through the issuance of the annual report in October. So appreciate the cooperation from her team and her group and putting together schedules and support that we needed. But really nothing here to call out to the committee's attention, just some required communications we have provided for you. We're also highlighting here within Appendix B other services that we are performing related to fiscal 2023. So I will move forward because there's more detail on each of these in the next slides. These first two items here relate to both federal and state dollars that the university receives. So on the federal side, the Uniform Guidance Compliance Audit is something that's done on an annual basis as the university expends more than $750,000 in federal awards. So the university in fiscal 23 actually expended $1.2 billion in federal awards. Those are predominantly in research and development and student financial aid, which we test on an annual basis. The university does continue to qualify as a low-risk auditee, and we did identify 6 major programs for testing. This audit work is nearing completion, and we believe we should be able to issue that report here in December. On the state side, for the Minnesota Office of Higher Education, this is an examination of state awards that are given to students. So we make a number of selections across each of the campuses and ensure that students are eligible for the state awards that they are given and that the amounts dispersed to them are appropriate. This work is also nearing completion, and we anticipate issuing the report here before the end of the year. On the NCAA front, annually, Division I institutions, so the Twin Cities campus, are required to have agreed upon procedures performed. And on a 3-year basis, the Division II institutions, so think Crookston and Duluth, are required to have the agreed upon procedures done as well. For fiscal 23, both Twin Cities and Crookston were in scope. The procedures to be performed are outlined by the NCAA, so they're consistent across all universities. And they involve performing procedures over revenues and expenses for each of the athletics departments, capital assets, debt, any of the booster club organizations that support athletics. And then we do look at internal controls that differ from the financial statements, so primarily around the ticketing process for events. We anticipate issuing reports for both of those campuses here in December as well. The next item is a partnership grant audit related to a grant from the state of Minnesota. We actually performed audit procedures here over the grant expenditures for a period of time, and that report was issued in October. And then in the current year, we were engaged to perform some procedures around some of the university's retirement plans. And really performing procedures as designed by management to understand that the plan is being operated in accordance with its provisions. And so we made selections across eligibility of participants, payments that have been made, loans that might have been made, and that report was actually issued yesterday. We will come back to you with results of the audits that aren't completed as of today's date, but will be completed here this year with the actual results, and you'll see copies of those reports. That's the end of the prepared materials we had, but we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from committee members? I have one quick question. You may have clarified this already, but it was on the first slide of Appendix B. I don't know what number that is in here. Maybe page 99 for those who are looking in the docket. So when it says assurance provided, full versus limited, what is that? Could you clarify what that means exactly?
Yeah, so with the limited assurance, we're really just going through and, Chair Farnsworth and members of the committee, from a limited assurance perspective, we're going through and just letting you know whether or not, we've performed this procedure. Did we identify anything? And the others are a more comprehensive actual audit and giving opinions based on the work that we found.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hoyam, Ms. Dockendorf, thank you for being back with us. I can't find where it was, but you talked about auditing the valuation of investments, particularly the ones that aren't readily, they're not, they don't have a ticker price and things like that. On my drive in this morning, I was listening to NPR, and they said in tax documents, Mar-a-Lago was 18 million, but to bankers, it was 1 billion. So it was interesting. That was just fresh in mind how valuations can vary. Is that an area that's typically of higher risk? I mean, that's probably part of the reason you're looking into that, right? Because there are those that you kind of have to do a little more digging, or you're trusting the third party in terms of what they're reporting. I guess, what is our exposure to those kinds of investments? Or if you could just talk a little bit more about that process.
Chair Farnsworth, Regent Kenyanya, and I'll also ask Controller Viola if she wants to weigh in maybe on how much may be from a real estate perspective. But absolutely, when we're testing the alternative investments, it is something we identify as a higher risk. It's a significant amount on the university's statement of financial position, so something we spend quite a bit of time on. Our procedures will vary a little bit depending on what the investment type is, but we're really working to understand what the university has in place from a policy perspective, what is their interactions with the investment managers, and then we are getting back to audited financial statements for those funds. So almost all of them are audited. They're on a lag, so their year end doesn't always align with the university's June 30 year end. And in that case, then we're understanding what is management doing to determine the appropriate value as of June 30th. I don't know if you want to add any more for...
Chair Farnsworth, Regent Kenyanya, members of the committee. What I'll add to that is that we do have procedures in place within the university to review statements from investment managers. As of 6:30, we're looking at those closely. And we're working back with them to find out any updates to the valuation. We also have certain procedures where we continue to evaluate any updated information that we receive through the issuance of the audit, and that helps us make sure that we are issuing the audited financial statements with the best available information available to us.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you very much. This looked good, and look forward to getting the rest of those ones that were mentioned, the audit reports, by the end of the year.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our second item is to review and act on the recommended appointment of Clifton Larson Allen, LLP, as the new external auditor for the university. Controller Viola will be joined this time by Associate Vice President Mike Volna, who I believe is on Zoom. And I will let Controller Viola proceed when she's ready.
Good morning, Chair Farnsworth and committee members. It's my pleasure to spend a little bit more time with you here this morning to present the administration's recommendation for the appointment of Clifton Larson Allen as the university's new external audit firm. This recommendation concludes the process that began last December when a plan was discussed with the Audit and Compliance Committee to proceed with a request for proposal or an RFP process to solicit responses from firms interested in being an appointed external auditor. An RFP was executed in a timely manner to be in alignment with the contract that is in place with Deloitte, which expires at the conclusion of the fiscal year 2023 audit and attest engagements. The RFP was crafted by members of an RFP committee based on the evaluation criteria shared with the Audit and Compliance Committee last December. The RFP committee was made up of members from across the university that either have prior experience as auditors themselves or who regularly interact with the university's auditors. The RFP committee was also responsible for review and scoring the RFP responses. The university received 7 responses. Of the respondents, the RFP committee conducted interviews of 3 audit firms. The committee unanimously recommended Clifton Larson Allen. In addition, Clifton Larson Allen representatives have met with Chair Farnsworth, Vice Chair Gully, and Chief Auditor Galswick, as well as Mike Volna, Associate Vice President of Finance, and myself as Controller. All of these individuals have been supportive of moving forward with the recommendation of Clifton Larson Allen. Lastly, I'd like to share that the contract with CLA is included in the consent agenda for today's Finance and Operations Committee, as it is a purchase that's greater than $1 million. The contract will be a 4-year contract with 3 one-year options to extend. The total value of the contract, including extensions, is $4,950,000. And at this time, I will stand for any questions regarding the appointment of Clifton Larson Allen as the university's external auditor.
Excellent. Thank you. And before we turn to discussion, is there a motion to recommend approval of the appointment of Clifton Larson Allen, LLP, as the university's external auditor?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, thank you. This was just noted, but I'll also note again that the Finance and Operations Committee will be taking up the contract with CLA later today, and then that contract will be contingent upon the board approving this committee if the committee chooses to make, approving the appointment if the committee chooses to make this recommendation. So we're talking about this 3 times this week, so it's a little bit of parliamentary stuff, but just want everyone to understand that. So now, is there any discussion? And I'll turn to Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Controller. It's my understanding that CLA is also the foundation's auditor. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I was just wondering if there was any consideration or conversation there, and maybe that's not even necessary at all. Is there not? I mean, I imagine they already have a contract that has its terms, so it's not like we could, negotiate that together. But just wondering if that was a consideration in any way.
Chair Farnsworth, Regent Kenyanya, great question. So we do have separate contracts. The foundation would have their own process, their own RFP. There are some, from a logistics standpoint, we typically need to receive the foundation's financial statements as well as a part of the audit for the university, and they are presented in the university's financial statements. So from a coordination of work, there may be some benefits from that perspective, but outside of that, there was not specific coordination with the foundation with this process.
Mr. Chair. Thank you. And do we know, are there different partners assigned to the 2 entities?
That is a great question. I don't have the answer for you at this moment. I can certainly find that out and follow up.
Looks like the answer might be yes. I'm seeing from another. I think we have our partners that are here that we're engaging with in the audience mention that as well, and I saw a yes. So, did you have a follow-up, Regent Kenyanya?
I guess just not knowing much about how this goes, that is okay, right? Having not only the same firm but the same partners for this two entity. There's no concern there.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm done.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Chair Farnsworth, Regent Kenyanya. As far as having the same audit partners, no, I'm not aware of any concerns that we should have around that. From a professional standards standpoint, CLA would have their own process for assigning partners to the engagements. In addition to that, we also go through certain review whenever we engage with an external audit firm around independence to make sure that there aren't any concerns from that perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think they're different, actually, right? As the clarification, Chief Auditor Galswick can comment on
Thank you,
this.
Chair Farnsworth. Yes, they're separate partners.
Different partners.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Regent Ted Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. I just have a comment. I had the opportunity to work closely with Clifton Larson Allen as the Bush Foundation was creating the Native Governance Center, which is still around, and they also assisted the university in creating some training in tribal finance, which was badly needed. So I think they're an excellent firm, and I think that's a great choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Talurabe.
Chair Farnsworth, my question was just generally about how often we change auditors. Could you just help us to understand the time of that time span?
Absolutely. Chair Farnsworth, Regent Talurabe. So the process right now revolves around the existing contract cycle. So as I mentioned earlier, the contract with Deloitte is expiring with the engagements that they're currently working on. And so we would take a similar approach with the contract that we're looking to move forward with. We would have a base contract of 4 years. If at the end of those 4 years we felt that we wanted to continue with CLA, we would do so by exercising those options to extend the contract. The other option for the university would to proceed with an RFP at an earlier point in alignment with the contract terms.
Thank you. Chief Auditor Galswick.
I think Chair Farnsworth, Regent Talurabe, the one piece I would add is there is no requirement to change audit firms periodically. That's something that's come up in committee before. There's been a desire to potentially look at other audit firms and see what's out there, and that's why we went through a robust RFP process. And there were many qualified candidates, including our existing external auditor, Deloitte, but we felt that Clifton Larson Allen rose to the top.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Regent Talurabe, sorry.
Sorry, maybe just a follow-up. Given, I guess, the market, did we see a significant increase in the cost?
Whoever wants to answer that, yeah.
Chair Farnsworth, Regent Talurabe. So when we looked at each of the bids, I would say that what we received from CLA was competitive with the market. In relation to the existing costs, I don't have those exact changes that we had. There was a slight increase, but again, it was competitive with the overall respondents that we received. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just say that, Vice Chair Gully and I were part of this process, having the chance to talk with CLA ahead of this meeting, and we were really impressed and pleased with the conversation that we had. This is one small part of the conversation, but they had talked about audit and compliance training and engagement opportunities on the governance side, which was not something that I've thought of before. I mean, being new to this committee and all that, maybe that was some previous conversation with this committee and our other firm, but I really appreciated hearing that and thought there'd be some good opportunities. Of course, the administrative side is where the bulk of the work happens with an external auditor, but there were some, I think, unique nods to our governance role and our committee's role when it comes to this that I thought was really great to hear. So I think we are good with questions and discussion. So it appears that we are ready to vote. And so all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The motion is approved. So a reminder that we will take up the contract and consent at Finance and Operations, and then the overall engagement again at the full board meeting in the Audit and Compliance Committee report on Friday. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, and we knew we had a little bit of a lighter agenda, but we have plenty of time, so just letting committee members know and presenters to please take the time that you need on our next item to discuss the institutional compliance report and the institutional conflict of interest report. To present on this item, I'd like to welcome Chief Compliance Officer Coomer, Boyd Coomer. Coomer, please get started whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Farnsworth, members of the committee. So this report in your packet, I believe it starts on page 105, just for your reference, is an annual report that I present to this committee that summarizes the activities of the Office of Institutional Compliance program, as well as a separate report where we cover the Institutional Conflict of Interest program. So in this report, you'll see that it provides a comprehensive overview of our compliance activities and focuses on three key areas: our compliance risk review summaries, our U-Report statistics, and the U-Report is the university's hotline for reporting misconduct. And then we've added a component to this. Last year, this information was in the report for the first time, a consolidated report of misconduct, where we reach out to all of our central offices that receive reports of misconduct directly and investigate those directly, so we could pull this information together. But first, we'll start with the compliance risk review summaries. So the compliance risk review process is designed to be a collaborative, cross-functional, cross-educational strategy for the oversight and management of significant compliance risk. The process involves my office conducting very detailed research into compliance topics, then reaching out to the stakeholders that are responsible for those topics and collaborating with them to create a self-assessment tool. Once that tool is created, they apply it to their work in compliance around that particular topic. And then we come back and we sit down again with them to review the findings and ensure that we have the appropriate compliance framework around the topic that was being reviewed. So it's not by any means, it's an audit, it's a look at the compliance structure around that topic. So policies and procedures that should be in place, education and training, how is compliance in that, over that topic, how is it monitored? This has been a really successful program, and over the past 6 years now, we've conducted about 30 of these compliance risk reviews. For the next year, we plan on conducting reviews in environmental safety, immigration, controlled substance use in clinical settings, and sexual misconduct. And the sexual misconduct review and environmental safety review, those will be sort of repeat reviews where we're coming back around after a number of years and relooking at those topics. The completed reviews for this past calendar year included discrimination and clinical services. There were no significant gaps in the compliance framework identified in both of those areas. And the compliance, those topics were just found to be well managed from a compliance perspective. Any questions about the compliance risk review process? Okay, thank you. So I'll move on to the U-Report statistics then. So as I mentioned, the U-Report is the university's hotline for reporting misconduct. It's available by phone or online. We actually receive most of our reports online, which is interesting because compared to other institutions just anecdotally talking to other compliance officers, they have about a 50-50 split. It seems like that's the trend, but we're all the way like 90% plus of our reports come in online. So just interesting how this is approached by individuals. The tool is hosted by a third-party vendor and the reports may be made anonymously. So one thing that I like to tell people as we're raising awareness about the U-Report system is you're not calling the university. it is going to a third-party vendor, so the phone's not ringing here, and that provides a bit of a buffer space for people, right? So if they're worried about making an anonymous report, but having their phone number come up or having their their IP address logged somewhere, we don't have access to that information. That's the beauty of that third-party vendor. And another really great thing about the system as well is the way it's set up. People can report anonymously. They don't have to report anonymously, but they can. And they are still able to have a communication loop with the university because it's anonymous. They create their own user ID and password so they can keep logging back in or calling back into that system. And this is where that third-party vendor becomes the sort of the middle person on that communication. So it's either posted in the report by the reporter or in the phone call. We get the information so we can ask questions of an anonymous person. So it's a good system. Our statistics for fiscal year 23, we had 284 reports. This is up a fair amount from what we typically receive, between 225 and 250 in a given year. And what we've noticed is a trend of multiple reports on the same issue. And it's not just with us. We've talked with our vendor, and they're seeing this in their other clients as well. There's this trend towards multiple reporting. And I do, though, think that some of this is from the work that we've done reaching out to leadership, supervisors, encouraging them to promote the U-Report in their meetings, and also when a complaint comes in directly to them, also asking that complainant to file a U-Report so we have it documented in this system. So to me, this upward trend is just a demonstration that the awareness is increasing and people are more comfortable with the system. Of those 284 reports, hotline reports that were made, at the time that this report was written, 88% of those had been reviewed, so either investigated or otherwise managed by an appropriate party. 10% of the reports were substantiated to have involved non-compliance. So there was enough evidence upon investigation to know that there was non-compliance. Doesn't mean that it was malicious. It could have been a misunderstanding of policy. It could have been somebody knew they were breaking policy, but they were taking a shortcut that they thought would work. So it's not always a malicious intent behind this. And then 90% were, though, unsubstantiated. And so categories of reports and comparisons to the previous fiscal year are also provided for you to review at your leisure. And then the consolidated reports of misconduct. As I mentioned, this was a component that was added to the report last year, where we reach out to our compliance partners or these other central offices that receive reports directly and investigate them themselves, so that we could, as an institution, get a broader look at what the reporting environment looks like. And this is a very manual process, obviously. It is a bit time consuming, but I think that it does provide some useful information. So there was a total of 1,015 reports that were consolidated from these various offices. 95% of the reviews had been completed at the time this report was written. And of these, 7.5% were substantiated and 92.5% were found to be unsubstantiated. So that tracks somewhat closely with what we saw in our own U-Report data as well. And as I mentioned, this is a really manual process. We started typically in September, asking our partners to start pulling this information together for us. Our goal is to, in the future, have a centralized investigation management tool. And actually, the RFP is in draft form right now. I'm working with purchasing. And what this tool will allow is it will take out some of that manual process. So each individual central office that receives reports and conducts investigations can log that information into a secure central tool that helped them track their investigations, and then centrally for my office to allow us to see what has been what has been reported, at a high level, where those investigations stand, and then start to analyze that information so we can be more proactive. So if we see a particular area maybe has an increase in reports, we can look into that. Increase in reports is not necessarily a bad thing, again, because it means awareness has been raised. But we can start looking for common factors. So if you have a number of reports coming in a particular area and they're all policy violations that when you get down to the root cause, you determine that it's just a misunderstanding of the policy, well, maybe policy language needs to be changed. Maybe there needs to be additional education. Or maybe there's a single person who, in which we don't really have that visibility right now in the same way. If you have an offender in one area, it's reported to an office because of the type of offense, they investigate, they manage it, move on, and then somebody else reports that offender to another office for another type of misconduct, it's investigated, et cetera, moved on. This tool would allow us to see that common factor and say, okay, well, maybe this individual needs a corrective plan, or somebody to more directly address all of the issues with them. So yeah, we're looking forward to that, and the goal right now is to have that up and running by the start of the next fiscal year. Any questions about the U reports?
I do, actually. So I'm glad you just talked about the centralized, having a centralized investigation management tool. That's kind of what I was thinking before you got to that. Well, it would be nice if we had some sort of tool. So thank you for addressing that. My kind of two questions were, I personally understand kind of the function and what a U report looks like from a structural standpoint. So trying to understand the difference between that and then when you talked about consolidated reports of misconduct. So it says, reports of misconduct may be made directly to central offices. So does that include everything from like an email to a different kind of court? Like, what do those generally look like when something comes into a central office, and assuming that could be really any structure, structurally within the institution. So if you could just talk a little bit more about that, I'd be curious.
Thank you, Chair Farnsworth and members of the committee. That's a great question. It really depends on the central office, what they have in place. It could be something as informal as a phone call to maybe their own web portal that they've built, that somebody can come forward and report misconduct in that particular area or a concern in that particular area. So I think there's really quite a range of how these can be received.
Great, excellent. And then I have one more question, and then I'll get to other colleagues. So looking at then still under that consolidated reports page where it talks about the number of reports where misconduct or noncompliance were confirmed, 46. And then right below that, I'm trying to understand the difference between a non-termination disciplinary action and a non-disciplinary action. Just would be curious. I think you started to get into some examples there, but that would be on page 113 of our docket. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Chair Farnsworth, members of the committee. So to elaborate on this and maybe provide some examples. So in these cases, there was substantiated noncompliance. And as I mentioned, sometimes that can be unintentional, right? Some misunderstanding of policy, and more coaching is needed, more education is needed. So that would be the non-disciplinary action. Or maybe it's a verbal conversation that's then documented by the supervisor. So it's not a corrective action. It's just, hey, we're aware that this has happened. We know that it wasn't intentional. But so this is your informal reminder that you can't do this. Discipline, on the other hand, would be like a formal written one for an individual, or maybe they're given time off work, that type of approach. Of course, and I think termination is pretty self-explanatory.
Right. Great, thank you. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Coomer. My question is about, I guess, kind of how we interpret the data and the amount of reports. You referenced increasing reports could be a good thing because of, increasing awareness. And yeah, I generally tend to think that as well. And I think in other reports over the years on this topic, or with EOAA, where they're talking about sexual misconduct, that's generally what we say. How do we know when it departs from that? Because it could be awareness, but at what point is it more incidents, and how do we interpret that?
Chair Farnsworth, Regent Kenyanya, thank you for the question. Members of the committee, thank you for the question. There's really two parts to my answer. One is the technology that we're dealing with right now, and it's more or less the people that manage these reports looking at them and trying to call out trends in the data. So I can tell you that our jump in U reports alone this year, from our typical 250 to the 280 some that we have, I can attribute most of those to a couple of incidents that happened where we had multiple reporters. So that one was pretty easy to spot. But broadly, for all of these areas, it's really, right now with the technology that we don't have, it's hard to know. Having a SMART tool in place, an investigation management tool with a really good analytic capability, would then allow us to look and really dive into that information and look for trends that could be concerning, and also correlate it with our activity. If it's compliance week and my compliance coordinator, who does a great job with outreach, goes in and gives a talk on the U-Report system in a particular college or at a series of staff meetings, and then that month we see increase in reports from that area, well, we can say, okay, so there were some issues that were festering, and hearing from the compliance coordinator, learning about the U-Report system, and maybe gaining some confidence that things would be investigated, was enough to push people over the edge and report. So there's a little bit of art to this, but I think that there's an opportunity also in the future to apply really good science and analytics to this information as well.
Regent Kenyanya, any follow-up?
Yeah, just a comment. That's very helpful, and I'm glad that kind of thinking's happening. Just because, while I think the general trend is true, bad trends can get lost in that if we just cover, okay, more reports, it means we're doing well on advertising it. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Farnsworth and Mr. Coomer. First, I support that centralized tool. I think it's important to look for patterns, and it gives that whole picture, both breadth and depth. My question is kind of similar to Regent Kenyanya's in looking at substantiated and unsubstantiated findings. So my understanding is it goes to this third party who then kind of sorts them out and sends them to the appropriate place. There's an investigation. There's some kind of investigation. There's findings. Then do those findings go to a decision maker, or where do they go? And I'm wondering, sometimes in some of these areas, there's a clear line between substantiated and unsubstantiated, yet some might come close to that line and individuals make that decision. Maybe they do here or they don't. But then, even with those that are unsubstantiated, is there some follow-up with that issue when appropriate, so that while it wasn't substantiated, there's work to be done?
Good question.
If that makes sense.
Mr. Coomer?
Chair Farnsworth, Regent Davenport, thank you. That is an excellent question. So I can speak from the U reports perspective and maybe talk a little bit more about how we manage those. So you're right, the reports go into that third party. When they come to the university, they come into my office, and we immediately share them with a consultative team that consists of myself, chief auditor, our vice president for human resources, and our deputy general counsel. So all 284 of those reports were shared with those individuals. The 4 of us make up this consultative team. We review it, and we decide on the appropriate or an appropriate area within the institution to review it. So if it's an environmental health and safety concern, it's going to go to our environmental health and safety office. HR complaints typically go to the local HR professional in that area. And what we require with the U-report system is when those U-reports are then sent off to be investigated, the investigator has to fill out a report and send it back to us when they're done. And we review those reports as well to determine if due diligence has been done. And quite often we will, if we see that we believe there's a deficit or more action that could have been taken, we'll send it back and say, thanks for the work that you've done, but we want you to, go and interview more people, or we want you to drill down into this, or what sort of proactive measures can you take? In the cases of the unsubstantiated, they often do, and I know Tina Marisam's group and our Title IX office, they're great with this. If they have a complaint come in and it can't be substantiated, they look at that as an opportunity to provide additional education and resources, and that's exactly what they do. So,
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts on this part of the U report part of the presentation?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Regent Kenyanya.
Yeah, I'm still formulating the question because I just thought of it and as I was trying to buy time, but you were about to move on. So,
You have one more, so you have
okay,
time.
all
Keep
right.
going.
On that last point about that consultative group, this is more of a comment, you don't have to answer it now, but kind of as I listen to the folks on there, I mean, it sounds pretty administrative and they all should be there for sure, but when I think of the university, at least in one way, I kind of, we have administrative, we have academic and student life, so I wonder if there's an opportunity to have whether the provost or someone from the provost office there, and then as well as someone from student life. And I know particularly Provost Corson, we recently talked about how different misconduct is handled, with faculty and with grad students, and that's a kind of whole different world that we're looking forward to learning a little more about. And then obviously, there's the student conduct and that whole side. So not necessarily a question, but I'd be interested if those might be representatives to bring into that group.
Mr.
Chair
Cooper?
Farnsworth, Regent Kenyanya, good question. And I think going back to the process, though, the answer to your question is sort of in the process. If we have a student conduct issue, that does get disposition to the student conduct office and to review and investigate. There's some confidentiality here as well. People are being reported for misconduct, so I don't know if a broader audience on that initial review is necessarily the best idea. The important thing, though, and to your point, is that we involve the correct people. When there's faculty issues, it often does go to the provost office, but more, appropriately, we, depending on the type of infraction, of course, we'll start with the department head, that faculty member's direct supervisor. The U-report system, there's always a balancing act with this, and I've learned this a long time ago. You want people to report, and if people feel that the person they're reporting, because I think humans are just more or less compassionate, right? If they think, wow, the university is going to come down with a really heavy hand on that person, I think this should be reported, but I want it to be done fairly. That can actually have a chilling effect on reporting as well. You've got to sort of right size all of the actions. And to that point, taking a faculty misconduct issue directly to the provost can be seen by faculty as a step too far. This should have been handled with my department head. It wasn't that serious of an infraction. It was unintentional, or whatever the case was. Why does the provost need to know about this? So again, it's that balancing act. And I think the mix of people that we have in that consultative team. I mean, we have the HR expertise, we have the legal perspective. Quinn has a very broad view of the institution as well, and then all of my years of compliance experience, we can look at these and say, okay, does this need to be escalated up to that senior leadership level, or is this really something that could be appropriately handled between the employee and their supervisor, or maybe their local HR?
Thank you. Do you have any follow-up? I'm sorry, Regent Davenport from earlier. Did you have any follow-up from your question earlier too? You're good?
Thank you. Just, I would say that I really like that collaborative approach, and it doesn't fall onto one individual, but there's all those eyes on it.
Right, I'm not quite calibrated this morning, so sorry. I wanted to thank you. And then one thing I have before check with everyone else is this discussion. Well, this has been a great discussion in general about U-reports, and I didn't really realize the kind of consultative group that existed. So that's helpful to know about. And then great questions from everybody. And this discussion about the consolidated reports of misconduct, going back to that again, has made me think, as regents, we, I think, seem to be an input for these kinds of things. And it's important, I think, for us to have this conversation today. And it's always good to hear that we're doing continued engagement within the university for awareness and understanding about the U-report system, because I often, will point folks that way who maybe it's misconduct, maybe it's other things, but we definitely get things, I think, from constituents that seem appropriate for U-reports. And so this was just kind of a helpful mini professional development as a regent to know more about that as well. So any final questions or comments on the U-report part before we get to the next part of the report? Yeah, Chief Auditor Galsworth.
I think, Chair Farnsworth, I just want to comment on your last comment here, because I think it's really important that we always encourage people, when possible, to use the U-report system. It provides an anonymous reporting venue, but it also ensures that a group of people are able to kind of take a look at this collectively. We don't want to have any sort of chilling effect on people reporting potential misconduct wherever they feel comfortable, and that's why you do still see there's a couple of people who will, call internal audit directly, will call compliance directly, et cetera. And so we don't want to necessarily dissuade people from doing that, but when possible, running it through the U-report, make sure that all those checks are happening, that we have that final report that's being reviewed by that consultative team, et cetera. So always encourage everybody on the board or anybody else who hears any potential concerns to encourage people to use that U-report.
Right. Absolutely. I think we're ready to move forward to the institutional conflict of interest part.
All right, thank you, Chair Farnsworth, members of the committee. So also annually, my office provides a summary of institutional conflict of interest activity that has taken place. This was, at one point in time, a calendar year report. It's been changed to a fiscal year report. So if anybody was looking at past reports for any reason, that you might notice that difference. So in fiscal year 2023, the office received 101 financial disclosures for university officials. These are the very sort of detailed financial disclosures that senior officials at the university have to file. We had a 100% compliance rate with the filing of these. And the list of university officials required to file can be found in the administrative policy. So we conducted our annual review of financial relationships that the university has with business entities. And so this is a deep dive into the following areas. We cover tech commercializations, gifts to the universities, vendor contracts, and sponsored research. And we look for relationships. So is there a vendor who's also donating a lot of money? And if there is, that doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing. We want we want entities to donate money to the institution, but are the appropriate safeguards in place, and is it being done in a way where the donations aren't leading to the contracts, for example? So we did not identify any relationships that compromise the integrity of the university's research, teaching, outreach, or other mission-related activities. We conducted 2 reviews of a conflict matter involving the president, and this was pursuant to the Regents policy, institutional conflict of interest. These matters were presented to the Board of Regents on December 15th, 2022. That was for President Gable, and June 2nd, 2023 for interim President Ettinger. We did not identify any other matters involving subject matter reserved to the Board of Regents for managing, reducing, or eliminating institutional conflict of interest. And the board does reserve things such as external relationships with an unusually significant financial impact, for example, or potential conflicts that raise serious policy issues or have a significant public impact, or potential conflicts arising in matters that otherwise require the board's review and action under the board's policies. So the Institutional Conflict Review Panel is a group of hardworking volunteer faculty, staff, and a community member, held 7 meetings during fiscal year 2023 to address the following. There were 4 phase 1 clinical trials involving university licensed intellectual property, and that was to treat cancer patients. The panel did approve the conflict management plans that enabled the conduct of these trials at the University of Minnesota. There was a phase 1 clinical trial involving university licensed intellectual property to treat patients with limbal cell deficiency, stem cell deficiency. The panel approved a conflict management plan that enabled the conduct of the trial at the University of Minnesota. And these conflict management plans, they cover things like the how the researcher is involved in and does the researcher potentially own equity? That would be an individual conflict of interest. And then for the university, what sort of finances or financial interest does the university have in that product, and what mechanisms might we have to put in place to ensure that the research that is conducted here is conducted with the fullest integrity, and that the reason for conducting that research at the university meets a very I would say strict list of criteria. For example, there's limited expertise in this subject matter, and the experts are here. Okay, so if this research is going to happen, or we are otherwise somehow uniquely qualified, or perhaps the drug agent that's being investigated is also made here, and we don't know what the shelf life is, or what transporting would do to it. So those are the types of things that this committee weighs when they're looking at having research conducted here and managing then, because of that financial relationship, that institutional conflict component to it. There was a prospective clinical trial involving university licensed IP to treat patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. The panel issued a guidance letter to the potential principal investigator, withholding establishment of a conflict management plan pending resolution of a number of issues. So, and that's just one example where the panel just had additional questions, and again wanted to make sure that the research was appropriate to conduct here and that the appropriate safeguards were put in place. A phase 1 clinical trial involving university licensed intellectual property to treat pediatric cancer patients. The panel did not find in this particular case compelling circumstances to justify conducting the trial at the university, and so therefore a conflict management plan wasn't created. The research was not conducted here. Establishment of individual conflict management plans for 2 college deans. The committee met and established an individual conflict management plan for President Joan Gable, which was approved and amended by the Board of Regents at its December 2022 meeting, and established an individual conflict of interest plan for interim President Jeff Ettinger, which was approved and amended by the Board of Regents at a special meeting on June 2nd, 2023.
Great. I'll open it to any questions or comments about this part. I'll just note that our Board of Regents Governance and Policy Committee tomorrow is beginning the discussion about presidential conflicts of interest and potential changes to that process. So I know that's been a matter of public interest for folks, and so thought it was relevant to mention that as it relates to this report. All right, not seeing or hearing any questions or comments. Oh, Regent Davenport.
Thank you. And I guess more of a comment. The conflict management group that looks at that, they aren't the one source on these issues when they become an issue. There's multiple factors that vary in. And I guess I just want to say that because I commend the work of that group and want to recognize the validity of that group and their work.
Chair Farnsworth, Regent Davenport, thank you very much. It's a very dedicated group of individuals, and they take their work on that panel very seriously.
Thank
you. All right. Thank you very much for the presentation and the discussion. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
This brings us to the consent report. Chief Auditor Galswick, will you summarize the items in today's consent report?
Yes, thank you, Chair Farnsworth, members of the committee. There is one item in the consent report today, and it's involving an external auditing firm, actually Clifton Larson Allen, to perform what's referred to as a SOC 2 engagement of the university's FinPAC system. So a SOC 2 engagement is independent attestation performed by a CPA firm regarding the security and controls of a system that is holding an other entity or user's data to provide assurance to those users that that data is secure. Given that this is an external opinion that they're providing on this, it doesn't create any conflict of interest with the other work that Clifton and Larson Allen may be doing if approved later today in the FinOps meeting. This is an engagement that the university has worked with Clifton Larson Allen for a number of years, but has now exceeded the $100,000 value, and that's why it is moved from an information item to a consent item per board policy. With that, I can stand for any questions you may have.
Great. Before we turn to any discussion or questions, is there a motion to recommend approval of the consent report?
So moved.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
Great. Thank you. Is there any discussion or questions? Today seems to be Clifton Larson Allen Day here for our committee. So
I thought it was College of Liberal Arts.
Well, I'm not. I know. I feel like I can't say
This
CLA
time we're
now.
talking about CLA.
Right. I'm trying to move away from
Can
that.
we
I just
revote
thought
on
that. Right. There be no further discussion. We appear ready to vote on the consent report. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. The consent report is approved. There being no additional business before the committee, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.